Hello there, it's Matthew Flanigan once again with the Wargamer.com. In this video I will be doing an after-action report on the 11-hour scenario of the Battle of Antietam, Sharpsburg for you Southerners. It is a epic scenario, probably the biggest, I would say, most challenging scenarios that I've ever played in any Civil War game, although I'm sure some of John Tiller's works would be similarly lengthed. But this is more, I guess I would say, imposing because of the fact that it is in a real-time environment. In this scenario, it's 11 hours long. You take on the role of General Lee at the Battle of Antietam, and there you see Lee there. And you take on the role of Lee. It's an 11-hour real-time scenario. It's part of the Antietam map pack, which is an add-on for the game Scourge of War, Gettysburg. And I would have to say this is one of my most intense wargaming experiences ever. I mean, I can remember playing some classics back on Sid Meier's Gettysburg a couple of times, and some of the longer scenarios, you know, they were several hours. You could play, you know, the entire day 1, day 2 scenarios, and they were, you know, a couple hour long scenarios, but time was accelerated. It wasn't real time. And even I believe there was a 3-day scenario added later on after the initial release, and even that scenario wasn't, you know, real time. I mean, how could you fight a 3-day long battle in real time? I mean, you could, but I don't think they'd design a scenario. It would have to be a mod of some kind. But anyway, here you have me, first couple of minutes here, just looking through my placements, my forces and their defensive emplacements. It's still dark out, as you can see. Visibility's really poor because the sun hasn't come up yet. Fun bit of fact that I did find out researching this is supposedly the Battle of Sharpsburg was actually the first time that Lee had mounted his horse Traveler since the Battle of Second Manassas several weeks earlier. Actually, well, not quite a month, but 3 weeks earlier, he had injured his hand when Traveler reared unexpectedly, and Lee had fallen off the horse and injured his hand, and he was unable to mount Traveler again until the Battle of Sharpsburg. So that was a little bit of a history lesson there. Just like I said, going over the general placement, there's a big battery. That's a very large battery, I believe about 18 guns on the left, which is where the Union attack will come first. And I'm kind of looking over the forces on the left now under General Jackson. The scenario starts at 8:45. It's paused right now as I kind of look through everything. You can pause you know, the time. I do not believe you can accelerate, however, although and there you get a look. There's Jackson. It's got a summary of his force there. A division of Jackson's is not on the field, about 3,000 men under General Hill, who are tending to prisoners further south in Virginia in Harper's Ferry, where a Union detachment just surrendered. So that's about 3,000 men that you're without. As Lee in this scenario, you get access to about a total of 39,000, which is roughly what was totally engaged. Lee went on the campaign with 15,000 there. We're looking at the position on the far left, a little bit further north. Kind of on the Union flank there, General Stuart had established a battery there to kind of fire into the Union flank if they were to advance on Jackson. But as I said, Lee had about 39,000 men engaged here. He started the campaign with about 15,000 men, which is, for campaigns, even for the Confederates, that's a pretty small number after 1862. You really don't see the Army of Northern Virginia that small, you know, for a while again, at least not till after Gettysburg, and really not till after the Wilderness, after the Overland Campaign starts to wear Lee down a bit, the Army of Northern Virginia down a bit. I'm deploying a brigade here. There's some skirmishing going on the right, no serious action yet. But really, Antietam was the culmination of a series of battles. You really can tie it all directly back to the Peninsula Campaign, when General McClellan landed his army of about 100,000 men on the peninsula east of Richmond, Virginia. outflanked General Johnston. General Lee took command as the Union Army was at the gates of Richmond, launched a series of 7 days of continuous fighting and some vicious attacks in which Lee took about 20,000 casualties. It was at this point in the spring of 1862 that the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia reached its peak, somewhere around 80 to 90,000 men. They would never again command that many men, although in the Gettysburg campaign they did come close with about 75,000. But anyway, Lee had about 80 to 90,000 men. He lost about 20,000 men over those 7 days, and the Union Army lost, I believe, about 16,000. But they did unnerve McClellan enough. They didn't really win on the battlefield per se. They had one tactical success at Gaines' Mill. It was the battle that they had some success. The rest were really just the Union withdrawing after Gaines' Mill, though, and the Confederates hounding them. So Lee's army obviously took a pretty big hit, 20,000 men. They had already scrounged pretty much all the recruits they could get, so they weren't easy to replace. Then part of Lee's force engaged at the Battle of Second Manassas, which was, it was another very, very difficult battle. They lost over 10,000 men again. The Union Army lost about 17,000, Confederates about 12. And that was only a couple, that was about a month after. I'll correct myself on that. It was actually about 2 months after the Peninsula Campaign is when Second Manassas took place, and then about 2 weeks after that is really when Antietam got going. But my real point was that Lee had taken about a quarter of his army as casualties in the battle of in the battles around Richmond, and then another 10% at least of what had been originally formed before those battles of the 80,000 men. Another 10,000 roughly was lost at Second Manassas. So really by that point, over about 2 months, the Confederate Army lost over a third of its strength, assuming there's no reinforcements, which, over 2 months, I'm sure there were some, but not a whole lot. I mean, the Confederates had already stripped a lot of their coastal fortifications in the Virginia area for this offensive. They had instituted the draft already. 2 months during the summer, when they had already raised a lot of the troops that they intended to raise, was just not a whole lot of time to raise replacements. And you would see that as the campaigns went on. At the Peninsula Campaign, as I said, Lee had about 80,000 men. Second Manassas is hard to judge because his entire army was not there, but it was substantially weaker at Second Manassas, at least 20,000 weaker. Then he goes into the Antietam Campaign, and the amount engaged was actually only about 40,000 men. So you go from having about 80,000 effectives to really, he had 55,000 men he went into the north with, but could only bring 40,000 men to bear on the battlefield. That's some pretty serious attrition. And it's because these battles were very close fought together. You've got 7 straight days of fighting during the end of the Peninsula Campaign. At the beginning of July was when the last battle was fought. Then you have a 2-month reprieve, which really in the grand scheme of things is not very much. There were 3 months between Chancellorsville and Gettysburg, and then there was, an entire, July to April of July of 1863 till April of 1864 before there was another major battle in the east after Gettysburg. I mean, you don't typically fight a ton of battles in a close period of time. You can't keep up that kind of attrition, especially the Confederacy. The Union could do it, but the Confederates really couldn't. So I mean, these were not cheap battles for Lee, and they all culminated in this Battle of Antietam. So essentially, Lee's riding out the success that he had had at the Peninsula. He had, held back over 100,000 Union troops. Then at Second Manassas, they rout another Union army coming south under Pope. They then advance into the north, and as Lee's advancing into the north, General Jackson cuts off and surrounds 12,000 men at Harper's Ferry, and the Union lose 12,000 men there, although they were paroled, so I wonder how many of those ended up finding their way back into the ranks. but not by the time of this battle anyway. There you see some of my men engaging in hand-to-hand combat. But anyway, I'm getting more long-winded in this. Oh, they surrendered. That's interesting. Not used to the troops just surrendering if they lose a melee, but that doesn't help. Anyway, but the Union was really in a kind of a similar situation. 75,000 men for a Union army is kind of on the low end for the entire Army of the Potomac, although I believe a corps was left behind to stay in Richmond. Definitely not the full force when they had over 120,000 men to start the peninsula, but I mean, the Union was suffering pretty heavy casualties by this point, too. They had lost 16,000 men, roughly, in the Peninsula Campaign, just to combat. They had lost another 16,000 at 2nd Manassas. 12,000, as I mentioned, had just surrendered at Harper's Ferry. So, you know, the Union is looking at losses in excess of... in excess of 40,000 men. Doing the math there real quick. So they came into battle with only about 75,000, although they definitely did outnumber the rebels by almost, or the Confederates by almost 2 to 1. So you've got two very fought-out armies here engaging each other in what became the bloodiest day in U.S. history. The Confederates historically lost about 10,000 men to the Union 12. These were not cheap battles. That's a quarter of Lee's army yet again. But anyway, to the game, more or less. So, Hooker, the commander of the Union 1st Corps, launched the first attack by Union troops in the day, and that's what we're looking at here. We see the entire left of my line is engaged. The rest of my army is not engaged. McClellan's attack on September 17th of 1862 was an attack in echelon. You could look at it similarly to the attacks that Longstreet launched against the Union Army on the 2nd of July in 1863 at Gettysburg. Similar in the sense that the attack started at one end of the line and worked its way down to the other. Although not quite an all-encompassing. Obviously, Longstreet only commanded a corps, whereas this is dealing with the entire army. But Hooker is slamming into the Confederate left. The Confederates are struggling to hold their position. You see some of my regiments running from the field. I've driven a couple of Union regiments off by now. I think the biggest thing that's going to help me is that artillery fire. I will say that in Take Command, Scourge of War... in Take Command, the original series, artillery seemed heavily underpowered except with canister fire, whereas the long-range artillery, at least from my perception of it, looking at the results of this battle, seems to be more effective with shot and shell than previous versions of the game, although that's just my observation. I could be wrong there. As we look back here, we've got McLaws' division, who is waiting in reserve back at Sharpsburg. So I probably should begin bringing them up shortly, but thus far I haven't. For reasons I don't really know why. My force is obviously being pushed back here. Going back to the losses I was talking about earlier, though, in this game it's really not, you really get the sense that the Confederates need a reorganization because of all these casualties they've sustained. They haven't really merged or brought together regiments, and it shows. I mean, you have regiments in this game, and they all look pretty big because of the intense scaling done on this battle. I believe it's something like 4 to 1, so for every 4 people in real life, you see 1 spirit, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, this is an engagement over 100,000, almost 120,000 men. That would be about 30,000 individual spirits on the field, which is very taxing. As the battle goes on, you may notice my frame rates do slow down a little, not dramatically, but a little bit, and that is because of the massive amount of stress that a game like this does, with a scenario like this, does put on a computer. But anyway, you'll see regiments on the Confederate side with maybe 90 men. You know, it takes an entire Confederate brigade in some situations to face up to 1 or 2 Union regiments, because the regiments of the Confederacy were just so fought out. I mean, there are regiments with 67, 90, you know, 70 men going into this battle, and it doesn't really... They're basically companies. I mean, you have regiments, but they're companies, and then you have companies of maybe, you know, what, 20 men? I mean, the Confederate Army was just, you know, a shadow of what it once was. I believe it was D.H. Hill. I could be mistaken on this, but I believe D.H. Hill said during this campaign, only the heroes are left. Kind of goes, if you've seen the movie Gettysburg, it reminds me of the scene where Armistead's talking about how the cowards and shirkers are gone. You know, the only people left are the veterans. Well, that was certainly the case by the time of the Antietam campaign. At least on the Confederate side, the green troops were largely all gone. There were some green troops on the Union side. In fact, I believe French's division had something like 4,000 or 5,000 troops who had never been engaged in a battle before. But anyway, I'm keeping this troop here kind of holding my right even though no one's going there. I assume the Union will come through those woods at some point, and my other line's kind of holding. I've got a couple of brigades in the woods here to the left side of the screen, which I can pull up if I really need to. But it really kind of feels the whole time that there's just masses of Union troops that are being held off by small amounts of Confederate troops, which is pretty accurate. I would say that I am more conservative, at least to start this battle, than Lee was historically, or than maybe Jackson would be more accurate to say than Jackson was historically. There you've got another good shot of that big artillery barrage, bringing a regiment over from that brigade on the right to try and help support the line. But historically, the cornfield, which is actually behind where all these attacks are occurring, was the main site of a lot of the fighting early. The fighting really went back and forth throughout the battle. And the cornfield, especially with Hooker's attack, was a key point of contention. We're actually looking at the West Woods, I believe it is now, which is another objective point on my left. You see that artillery piece. You can tell by the sound it just fired canisters, so those Union troops are in close, as you can see there in the woods. Got a Confederate regiment here. I want to take that back to try and get some objective points back. You saw that little gold kind of blank symbol above there. That represented it was an objective point by having that Union flag there. And I want to retake it, so I'm going to try and move these regiments up closer to dislodge the Union, to retake that objective as fast as possible. But as I was saying, the Confederate troops actually attacked through the cornfield, counterattacked, and it changed hands something like 14 times. There are countless discussions of how the corn was cut down by the musket fire and by the artillery fire, so that when the battle started it was a full field ready to harvest of corn, and by the end of the battle it was like an empty field. You know, there were no stock, everything had been cut down. And that'd be kind of cool if the game had that type of physics engine. It doesn't. You know, it'd be neat, but it doesn't have that. But I don't attack that field at all. You'll see there's that objective marker in that field over there, that cornfield, a little bit to the left side of the screen now. So I hold back a little bit. My hope was if I was a little bit more conservative, if I stuck to more of the defensive terrain, I could hold better, get the Union out there in the open, and maybe try and stick in along the farm railings and then the woods. I do get suckered into engaging the Union basically in this open field between the cornfield and the woods. The only area my men have shelter on the left is the woods, and the Union has the same shelter. So that part was a little bit poorly executed on my part. But that was the plan anyway, was to try and do that. I will say, you know, if you're still, those of you who are still tuning in, this is going to be a very long video set. The entire battle was 11 hours. Now, I'm not doing the entire battle. As you can tell, I'm editing between parts. Hopefully my editing made some sense. It's hard to edit 11 hours of footage down. I never really have had to do something like that before, but I've edited it down to about 2.5 hours. That's still a pretty epically long string of videos, so if you stick with me, I appreciate it. There you can see the regiment just firing away, and now we're going to go back and take a look at McLaw's division again. This is at the point where I start bringing some of his brigades up in reserve, up from reserve to assist my far left. I also bring up Anderson's division, I believe, which is back here as well. So there's really 2 divisions in reserve here. One thing I did not do that Lee did historically Lee stripped his right of troops, so that the southern part of the battlefield, or his right, as the attack in echelon went along, as I said, the attack started on the left, it would move to the center, and then would expand down to the far right. As that attack continued, his troops, he basically only had a skeleton force. He had a couple of regiments holding the right side of his line, because all those troops that were there had been brought forward to support his left and center when Jackson attacked, and later when Sumner attacked. I don't strip the troops on the far right, so I believe I have a far better initial reception of Burnside's attack on the right. But I do believe it's part of the reason, you know, the battle ends in the result that it sort of does. Not to say that I'm defeated, because I'm not going to give that away, but I do believe that it could have perhaps, on the left anyway, ended in a more satisfactory result. Casualties in this game were very, very similar and accurate with the real casualties until kind of the end of the battle. And we'll see why later. But anyway, there I am charging off. The soldiers giving their famous rebel yell. It's still really a shame. I mean, with all the technology we have nowadays, it would have been interesting to hear what like a real rebel yell would have sounded like. There we go, getting into a melee here. I really, you know, melees probably are not to my advantage. Union regiments are larger, and, well, I don't know. I mean, they tend to have better weapons too, though, so might negate that somewhat. Jeez. A lot of people falling down dead. And retreating. And surrendered. I don't know why they surrender every time. They never retreat. I guess if you got involved in a melee like that, you'd be so intertwined with the enemy that you probably would have to retreat. There's some regiments I brought up. There's that line sort of on the left there. They're Hood's division. Sort of in reserve there. The Union also never really gets close to Dunker Church in their morning assaults. Which is another part that wasn't historically accurate per what really happened. Possibly because I wasn't as aggressive attacking forward. There was really much less swing back and forth. There was a little bit of my line bent here at this point. My line is bending, but it's not breaking yet. And I attribute that to the fact that I didn't run hell-nell up, you know, through the cornfield and charge on to Kingdom Come. Probably because of my historical knowledge. I know there's no chance for that attack to succeed. I mean, you've got 2 Union corps back there versus an outnumbered rebel force. Probably not a good idea. Granted, at the same time, like I said, I did make that blunder of just sitting out and duking it out in the open. There's some of the brigades I brought up in reserve. I'm also going to take some forces from my center, which Lee also did historically, to try and reinforce it. The left side of that line there in the center of my army is actually somewhat shielded by the forces on Jackson's left, so I think I can strip at least a brigade from there and be pretty okay. But yeah, nothing going on in the center yet. That doesn't really take off until around noon, and we're still pretty early here in the battle. So now, me moving those troops because I know the attack is coming at a certain time would be pretty unrealistic as well. I will say this scenario, as you'll find out later, does have some historical variance to it. So you can't count on the Union to do everything as they did historically. The attack with Hooker is historical. But other than that, there is some variation here. I don't know, just tinkering. In this battle, I also feel like I took on a lot more than I necessarily needed to. I end up moving single brigades of artillery and infantry around as I see fit, kind of acting more like a divisional commander or maybe a corps commander than than an army commander. The game does a good job of allowing you to place orders via courier and leaving the AI to sort it out, but I do that to a certain extent because I can't be everywhere at every time. But thanks to the echelon nature of the Union attack, I am kind of able to get a more hands-on approach than maybe another scenario where things are going on everywhere at once. You know, if the Union was attacking the center, the left, and the right all simultaneously, there'd be no way I could manage it all. But anyway. Hooker's attack still going on the left. Some of my reinforcements are coming up there. There's that big battery of artillery I've got. I don't know why. Sometimes the artificial intelligence maneuvers troops in a weird way. You saw there were some troops on the right which are kind of like in a cross line. I'm not really sure what's up with that. That's a pretty loose formation to be moving forward, and I guess they're moving into battle line. But there, the Union attack seems to, at least for now, be held back. They've still got some troops in the woods there, but at least in the center, they've been pushed back from where they originally came out. Center is still in dispute. Union troops withdrawing there. Another thing that's important to remember is ammunition. Infantry does a good job of finding ammo wagons when they run out. They only keep their standard, 40 to 60 round allotment. You move ammo wagons around to resupply them. I do believe artillery units do a very poor job of resupplying, rearming themselves. They never really seem to withdraw or call wagons to them. There on the far left, the Union has actually driven back one of my batteries of artillery, which was closer and firing into Union flanks with a sharpshooter regiment. That's why they're in green. But the other batteries remain unmolested, I believe, for the rest of the battle. The Union's got a brigade of infantry guarding against anything untowards by my artillery here, and more probably relevant is the infantry have gotten these woods up here to the left, Early's brigade, and Stuart's cavalry off there as well to the right. That's Early, I believe. And then there's 2 brigades of cavalry under Stuart. No, they really don't need to be there. I can bring some of that cavalry over. Here we go. I gotta say, the attack on the left, Hooker's corps did a better job than most of the follow-on attacks. Hooker, in my opinion, was probably the best Union Corps commander at this time. Trying to think of who all was in command of the Union Corps anyway. Let me see here. On the Union side, Hooker commanded the 1st Corps. General Sumner commanded the 2nd. Porter well, he actually had the 5th. Franklin commanded the 6th. Burnside the 9th, and Mansfield the 12th. Hooker attacks on the left. He then is also joined. And supported. Sumner also joined the attack on the left. Anyway, bringing up some reinforcements here. Sorry about that period of silence here. So Hooker attacks on the left with 3 divisions under Doubleday, Meade, and Ricketts. That's what we're kind of seeing right now, although not all 3 divisions are in yet. Mansfield then also attacks to support him. believe only a division with Mansfield comes in. Sumner launches an attack in support as well. So really 3 Union corps are participating in the attack on the left. Then you get some of Sumner's corps also goes through and attacks the center, and you get Burnside who attacks the the southern portion. Anyway, fighting going on here. The sound in this game did go out at one point during the recording. Union regrouping, and by this point they've launched another attack and driven off some more of my regiments here. You'll see them repositioning some of the forces on the left to secure my, or on the right to secure my left a little bit more firmly. So basically the morning goes on a while longer. Union continues to batter my left. I continue to feed reinforcements in. Although, as I said, I never withdrew the troops from the far south. I also made the mistake of not ever deploying Early's force. I totally forgot about them, to be honest. Just, I think, the only brigade in the entire army that went unused. McClellan's attacks were also pretty poorly coordinated, and that's pretty well represented in this. The attacks just seem random and in general seem unsupported, although there is one massive attack around midday, which is, at least in the game, was very well coordinated. I'm trying to get these troops up here along a fence line to try and just give them a better ability to resist the Union attack. For whatever reason, the Union's not pressing. They've got, you know, several brigades up here, as well as a very strong line of infantry through the entire cornfield, and I've only got a couple of regiments in their sights anyway that could resist them. I do have some pretty strong forces in the woods behind me, but the Union are still reeling and kind of rallying and recovering themselves from the morning fight. Also got quite a few troops here in the near point in reserve and column, but for, like I said, whatever reason, the Union isn't trying to press that. Maybe intelligently, because I could bring these troops up real fast, but I'm not really sure how the artificial intelligence comes to its decision on when to attack. I'm sure some of it is scripted. But yeah, Hooker did kind of dislodge me a little bit. I'm still there. I feel like my line is incredibly thin and weak, but hey, we're still there. We're still breathing. Alright, it is at this point, though, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and cut this video off at this point in time. I want to try and split these up into a couple of videos rather than just ask you to watch a 2.5-hour movie. So I'm going to cut this video off, and then another one's going to pick up right where I left off. It'll all be included in the article, though, so it'll just be on the other thumbnail.